The meeting of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra 7 is one of those turning points in ancient history where private lives and public power collide. It was not merely a romance. It was a political alliance whose consequences rippled across the Mediterranean and helped determine the end of the Roman Republic and the fate of the Hellenistic world. To see why their relationship mattered, we must look at the tangled personal histories behind it, who these people were, who stood beside them, who their children were, and how a single set of choices altered empires. Julius Caesar was already a towering figure in Rome before he ever set foot in Alexandria. A brilliant general and astute politician, he had expanded Roman influence through Gaul and had beaten rival forces led by Pompey the Great in a civil war that shook the Republic. Politically, Caesar's life was tied to alliances and marriages as much as to military victories. He had been married 3 times in adulthood, first to Cornelia, with whom he had his only legitimate child, a daughter named Julia. Later briefly to Pompeia, whom he divorced after the scandal of the Bona Dea in 62 BC. And finally to Calpurnia Pisones, who was his wife at the time of his death, and who is famous in the story of the Ides of March for the nightmare that made her beg him to stay home. Julia, Caesar's daughter by Cornelia, had been married to Pompey as part of a political alliance. Her death in 54 BC severed one of the links that had kept Rome's leading men in fragile balance. Caesar had other liaisons known in the sources, but in terms of legitimate offspring, his line was not secured by a son of his own. In that vacuum, his adoption of Octavian and his will would prove decisive for the future. Cleopatra, by contrast, was a dynastic monarch living in a very different political system. She belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Macedonian Greek ruling house that had governed Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great. The Ptolemies practiced sibling marriage as a means of maintaining dynastic continuity. The throne could be a household of co-rulers, and Egyptian tradition and Hellenistic political practice blended into an often ruthless contest for power. Cleopatra 7 was more than a pretty figure in Roman propaganda. She was highly educated, reputed to speak multiple languages, including Egyptian, which many of her Ptolemaic predecessors had not, and she understood how to present herself both as a Hellenistic monarch and as a living embodiment of Egyptian religious symbolism, particularly as the goddess Isis. She was politically savvy, ruthlessly practical, and determined to secure her line. That ambition meant she was prepared to play Roman politics to protect Egypt. Their meeting came at a moment when both parties needed each other. In 48 BC, Pompey fled to Egypt after his defeat at Pharsalus, hoping sanctuary with the Ptolemies. Instead, Ptolemy XII's advisors murdered Pompey, presenting his head to Caesar as a political offering, an act that horrified Caesar and exposed the volatility of Egyptian court politics. Egypt itself was in civil turmoil. Cleopatra had been driven into temporary exile by her brother and co-ruler Ptolemy XIII and sought a way back to power. Caesar's arrival in Alexandria, a Roman general who could legitimately assert authority in the region, presented the perfect opportunity for her. The traditional romantic image of Cleopatra rolled up in a carpet and smuggled into Caesar's presence makes great drama and appears in ancient accounts. Modern historians are cautious and suggest the story may be an embellishment of a more discreet covert meeting. Whatever its theatricality, the episode underlines Cleopatra's audacity and her flair for dramatic politics. By then, Caesar was an old man of 52 with many years of military and political experience. He saw in Cleopatra, who was 22, a ruler who could stabilize Egypt and ensure the grain supply for Rome, which was strategically necessary. For Cleopatra, Caesar offered the military backing and Roman recognition she needed to reclaim her throne. Their relationship became both personal and political. Caesar restored Cleopatra to power after the Alexandrian War, which erupted when Ptolemy's forces besieged Caesar and Cleopatra in the palace quarter. The conflict left parts of the city scarred. Some ancient accounts suggest damage to elements of the Great Library, though modern scholarship disputes the extent of that destruction and treats any claim of the library's total loss during this episode with caution. After Ptolemy XIII was defeated, he drowned in the Nile while trying to flee. Cleopatra was reinstalled as queen, with her younger brother Ptolemy XIV nominally set beside her as co-ruler, following Ptolemaic custom. In practical terms, Cleopatra exercised real power, and Caesar left Egypt with the political objective achieved: a stable, friendly Egypt under a ruler indebted to Rome and to him personally. Cleopatra bore a son during this period, Ptolemy XV, commonly called Caesarion, born in 47 BC. Cleopatra and many in Egypt treated Caesarion as Julius Caesar's son. Caesar himself never publicly acknowledged him as his legitimate heir in Rome, though he did not deny the boy's parentage. Cleopatra's hopes for Caesarion were political as well as personal. An heir who could bridge Egyptian and Roman lines would secure her dynasty's future. Cleopatra spent time in Rome as Caesar's guest in 44 BC. She lived in a private residence and was visible in Roman society, a presence that scandalized conservative elements of the Roman elite. Caesar's tolerance, and at times his flaunting of Cleopatra, fed criticism that he had been unduly influenced by an Eastern queen. Caesar's evident power and his election to lifelong dictatorship alarmed senators who feared the death of the Republic and the rise of monarchy. Political tensions in Rome were already raw, sharpened by civil war and the concentration of power in one individual. The assassination of Julius Caesar on March 15, 44 BC, the Ides of March, was carried out by a group of senators led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Their motive was explicitly political. They believed Caesar's accumulation of titles and honors and his acceptance of extraordinary powers meant the Republic was dying and a form of kingship was taking shape in Rome. They saw themselves as tyrannicides, restoring republican liberty by killing the man they thought on the verge of crowning himself king. The conspirators struck in the Senate, and in the raw aftermath, Caesar's body and the city's reaction set off a new round of civil wars rather than the restoration the assassins had intended. Cleopatra learned of Caesar's assassination with shock. Caesar's death removed her most powerful Roman patron and cast Egypt back into an uncertain landscape. Cleopatra returned to Egypt with Caesarion, while Rome itself entered a period of turbulent reckoning. Octavian, born Gaius Octavius and later known as Augustus, was named in Caesar's will as his adopted son and principal heir. Octavian was only a young man at the time, but his status as Caesar's adoptive son would, in time, enable him to claim legitimacy and power. Later he avenged Caesar's death, forming the Second Triumvirate with Mark Antony and Lepidus and prosecuting the civil wars that succeeded. The conspirators Brutus and Cassius were defeated at Philippi in 42 BC, events that altered the course of Roman politics and helped clear the path for Octavian's eventual sole rule. Cleopatra's path after Caesar's death led her to Mark Antony, Caesar's ally and one of the triumviral leaders who vied for supremacy in Rome. Antony was politically and personally consumed by the East. His alliance with Cleopatra began as political. Antony needed Egypt's wealth and grain to fund his campaigns, and Cleopatra needed a Roman partner who could protect her kingdom. Their relationship quickly became intimate and publicly theatrical. Antony's romance with Cleopatra, their joint rule, their children together, drew bitter criticism in Rome, especially from Octavian, who used the connection to portray Antony as a traitor to Roman values, seduced by an Eastern queen. Cleopatra and Antony had 3 children who figure in the dynastic arc of the late Ptolemaic house: Alexander Helios and twins Cleopatra Selene and Ptolemy Philadelphus, born over the course of the 30s and 40s BC. Antony's children with Cleopatra were instruments of alliance and legitimacy. Cleopatra's sole child by Caesar, Caesarion, remained the primary focus of her hopes for a dynastic future that might encompass both Egypt and Rome. The political consequences of Cleopatra's alliances were immediate. With Caesar's backing, Egypt enjoyed relative stability and a privileged relationship with Rome. Cleopatra secured the throne, consolidated power, and used her status to strengthen Egypt's internal administration and foreign posture. Her ability to command Roman support insulated her from internal rivals for a time. But the very closeness to Rome and the appearance that Egypt's queen might install a dynasty with Roman backing made Cleopatra a dangerous and polarizing figure in Roman eyes. Roman propaganda, especially in Octavian's hands, exaggerated and sexualized her influence to discredit Antony and justify Roman action. When a struggle between Octavian and Antony climaxed at Actium in 31 BC, it destroyed Cleopatra's political dream. Antony's fleet was defeated, their armies collapsed, and the couple fled to Alexandria. The final months saw Antony and Cleopatra make their last stand, and soon both died by suicide in 30 BC as Octavian's forces closed in. Cleopatra's death marked the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty's independence. Octavian annexed Egypt the same year. Caesarion was captured and executed, eliminating Cleopatra's line through Caesar. Octavian spared Antony and Cleopatra's surviving children partly for political theater. Cleopatra Selene and her brothers were paraded in Rome, and later Cleopatra Selene was married to the Mauritanian king Juba II, a Roman client marriage that signaled the thorough absorption of Egypt into the Roman system. Beyond the personal tragedies and dynastic fates, the Caesar-Cleopatra connection had lasting geopolitical effects. Egypt's grain had long been critical to Rome. Ensuring a friendly regime in Alexandria preserved Rome's food supplies and lent Caesar significant leverage. Cleopatra's use of Roman allies showed how client politics worked. Monarchs could remain formally independent while functioning in a web of personal bonds and mutual dependency with Rome. Yet these relationships were unstable because personal loyalties could be turned into political vulnerabilities. What protected Cleopatra in one era made her a target in another. Cleopatra's image in history has been shaped by the tug of propaganda and later legend. Roman writers often painted her as a foreign temptress, but contemporary scholarship emphasizes her political acumen. She issued coinage that presented her as a Hellenistic monarch. She cultivated a cultic image tied to Egyptian religion, and she maneuvered deftly among courtiers and foreign powers. Caesar and Antony were not dupes, but partners in strategies that reflected the realpolitik of their age. Cleopatra's multilingualism, her administrative reforms, and her diplomatic savvy made her more than the seductress of Roman trope. She was a ruler, trying to preserve a vulnerable and wealthy kingdom amid the rising tide of Roman hegemony. There are smaller, human details that make the story vivid. Cleopatra's skill at presentation, her dramatic arrival to meet Caesar, and her theatrical displays in Alexandria and Rome shows a ruler who understood spectacle as politics. Caesar's willingness to bring a foreign queen to the center of Roman life demonstrated how personal relationships could translate into policy. Caesar's public honors and the perception that he might crown himself worried Romans who still remembered the early kings and dreaded their return. These anxieties made assassination more likely. When conspirators struck in the Senate, they did so in the name of liberty, but their act unleashed further civil war. Octavian's eventual triumph and creation of the Principate closed the era of Republican experiment and converted Caesar's memory into a tool of imperial legitimacy. Cleopatra's children testify to the mixed legacy of the alliance. Caesarion's execution symbolized the end of a possibility, the hybrid ruling line Cleopatra had imagined. Antony and Cleopatra's children, meanwhile, were absorbed into the Roman world in subordinate roles. Cleopatra Selene's later queenship in Mauritania is a reminder that while dynasties fall, individuals can survive and adapt within new political orders. For Egypt, the result was clear: annexation into Rome after centuries of Hellenistic rule, a transformation in governance and economy, and the gradual erosion of pharaonic independence. Finally, the cultural repercussions were profound. The encounter between Rome and Egypt sparked a long-standing fascination in Western imagination. Cleopatra's figure has been reshaped across the ages, as seductress, as tragic heroine, as shrewd monarch, while Caesar's legacy became the foundation of imperial Rome. Together, they symbolize the moment when the old Eastern monarchies and the rising Roman power met, attracted, and finally consumed one another. In the end, Julius Caesar and Cleopatra were players in a larger story about power, identity, and survival. Their personal relationship mattered because it became the vehicle for statecraft. It bought Cleopatra temporary security and gave Caesar strategic advantages. It created a son who embodied a possible synthesis of cultures, and yet whose death signified the impossibility of that synthesis under Rome's imperial logic. Caesar's murder by Republican conspirators did not end Roman dominance of the Mediterranean. On the contrary, it ushered in a new phase that Octavian would turn into empire. Cleopatra, for her part, staked her dynasty on those Roman connections, and when Roman politics treaded the path of empire, she lost. The tale of Caesar and Cleopatra is therefore not a mere romance, but a cautionary lesson about the limits of personal power in politics. It shows how personal alliances can shift the fate of kingdoms, but also how volatile those alliances are when wider structures of authority and public opinion react. Their liaison produced temporary gains, dramatic children, and a sequence of events that rewrote the map of the ancient world. It left behind a legacy that is still studied and still compelling: the fusion of two great worlds for a brief, consequential moment in history. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and comment to join the journey through history. See you in the next video.